Alright guys, welcome to Box Office Addict. Today we're going to be looking at the second weekend for John Wick Chapter 4 and the opening for Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves, which has gotten surprisingly good reviews. This came out of South by Southwest and has 90% on Rotten Tomatoes, 72 on Metacritic. A lot of people are praising the sense of humor and tone and kind of its goofiness, in particular Chris Pratt. The guys who made this did that movie Game Night, and they've also worked on several screenplays for comedies and animated films. I believe one of the guys is the kid from Freaks and Geeks, the main little brother on that show. I think he is one of the co-directors and writers of these movies. And a lot of people are comparing it to a Marvel film, but like a good Marvel film. Here's the thing, though. The movie still only opened to 38 million. Now, there's a lot of reasons for this. There's a lot to break down here. Same with John Wick Chapter 4 having a shockingly steep drop in its second weekend. Although I'm on the daily numbers right now, so let me change that. I just realized. Stupid. Where are the weekend numbers? There we go. But John Wick, you see here, had a 61% drop, which was bigger than expected. So there's a few things going on here. There was major storms over the weekend, tornadoes, power outages everywhere. Even in the area I'm in, several people that I know, they haven't had their power for the last 2 days. And it still hasn't come back for some people. Beyond that, maybe John Wick Chapter 4 was a little front-loaded, or the 3-hour runtime affected its performance going into this weekend. We'll have to break that down when we get to that movie specifically. With Dungeons & Dragons, we're talking about an IP that nobody really knows how big it is. Now, everybody knows Dungeons & Dragons and how many people actually play Dungeons & Dragons. Beyond that, this movie's biggest movie star is like Chris Pine, Hugh Grant, Michelle Rodriguez. Nobody's really like a top of the A-lister in this movie. And I also think the movie just had really bad marketing. I don't think they sold what the movie was and what people like about the movie too much in the trailers. I think the trailers made it look really bland. Still, the word of mouth is positive. Maybe it can hold on. The problem is the movie cost $150 million, and it's just hard to see a scenario where this like makes 200 million domestic or something. I mean, I don't know if it'll even make 100 million. It should, theoretically, but it's hard to tell right now. So we're going to go down and work our way up a little bit. We don't need to talk about Puss in Boots and Avatar anymore. They've made their money. Same with Cocaine Bear and Jesus Revolution. We'll start with Ant-Man, which is at 471 million. It's still quite far away from the other two Ant-Man movies worldwide, and I think it's safe to say now it will not outgross the original Ant-Man. And I don't think it'll reach 500 million. So that's pretty bad. 65 starring Adam Driver's at 30 million and 54 million worldwide. Honestly, not that bad. I don't know what the budget of this movie is, but I mean, it's not a total disaster, considering what it is. Like, it looks like a straight-to-video kind of movie. Shazam continues to be a disaster. It's at 53 million domestic in 3 weeks, 119 worldwide. They are going to lose quite a bit of money on this movie. The directors commented on the film, Zachary Levi, the actor. It's not a good sign. It's not a good sign for DC, especially. Although Shazam was never a big property. Creed 3 continues to perform rather well domestically, 38.9% drop. We're at 148 million domestic, 258 million worldwide. This movie will not gross 300 million. So it won't become the highest grossing unadjusted Rocky film. That'll still belong to Rocky 4, which made 300 million. It's just the international numbers aren't there. The domestic numbers, I would say, are very strong. It should be able to get to about 170 million. Well, maybe not quite 160, 65 million, maybe. I'm being a little optimistic here. But still, it did very well domestically, but it didn't. And it did better internationally than the other two Creed movies, but I don't know if the Creed franchise is ever going to be at 350 million, 400 million worldwide. I just don't think it's going to be there. Now, with the $75 million budget and marketing, 250 million was probably a pretty good number. They expected that number, I assume, so that's why the movie got greenlit and they gave it its budget. It'll probably top out at like 275 million on the high end, maybe a little bit more, but I just don't see it. I don't think this movie has that much room left. Maybe another 20 million it can make. But still, nothing negative here. Like the movie did very well. It's just, you would hope that a movie like this could maybe do a little bit better, but once again, it just doesn't have a big international appeal. Even though domestically it's a fairly successful franchise now, with each film making more money than the previous. Scream 6 continues to drop off, even though this is a better hold this weekend at 36.4%, 5 million. So it made 98.2 million domestically so far. It will gross 100 million, which is what we said on opening weekend, although the film has not held very well from its opening. We went from 44 million, and we're in a few weeks now, and we're only at 98. So not a massive hit, but enough to justify the movie's existence with its budget being 35 million. And it's outgrossed the previous Scream film at 147. I don't see a big jump in the international numbers from weekend to weekend. So I guess there's a pretty limited international audience for the Scream franchise. We looked at the other Scream movies box office over the weekends that they came out, and I still think the highest grossing one's the original at 173 million. So this just isn't a big enough franchise worldwide. You think about other horror franchises like The Conjuring. Every single one of those made like 200 million, 300 million. Even the spin-offs from that. What's the name of that damn doll? Is it Abigail? Something like that. Like she made movies that made 300 million. So there's a lot of horror franchises out there from Blumhouse and other studios that are low budget that do fairly well. Scream is this big kind of legacy franchise reboot. They've kept the budgets low, which has been really good for them, honestly. But I do wonder maybe if Nev Campbell's in this, does it make a little bit more money? But probably not that much. I guess you could. I guess this will make 160 million. I can't see it doing much better than that. But hey, that's the thing about all of these movies here, right? That we're talking about, like Creed and Scream and John Wick. None of these movies have crazy budgets. The most expensive one's John Wick at 100 million, and that's not that insane of a budget considering what the movie is. We have His Only Son at 5.5 million. After being called on by the Lord, Abraham's faith is tested on his 3-day journey to sacrifice his son. Okay. From Angel Studios. That's a funny name for a studio. That's a crazy number 3. Let's talk about John Wick, though. I really want to get into this. So this was a way bigger drop than was expected. Everybody knew there was going to be a pretty decent drop because of the movie's runtime. It was fairly front-loaded. I do think the weather affected this. I do think this movie would have made 30 million over the weekend with different circumstances. So we'll have to wait to see next weekend and the weekend after that. I think this movie's going to hold better as it goes on. I think it's going to drop here and then do better like in week 4 and 5 and 6 and make a decent amount of money. But now we have to roll out certain things. I don't see this making well over 200 million. I don't even know if it'll reach 200 million, honestly. But you got to think here, if from a $73 million opening weekend to the second weekend ending and we're at 122 million, that's pretty good. It made over 20 million during the week. So, we're looking at like 50 million, just about here, 49 million over the week. So that's not bad at all. And then if you look at the international numbers, that's also very nice. When it made, I don't know what it made internationally compared to last weekend, but last weekend it was at 137 million. This weekend we're at 244 million. This movie cost 100 million, not including marketing. So I'm not going to say they've broke even yet, but I'd say they're on the cusp. I'd say 250, $60 million when it starts to cross that number. We're probably in the break-even point, at least worldwide, and they'll be happy with that. The question is, where does this movie end up now? Because I thought this was going to do a lot better than John Wick 3, which it honestly doesn't need to. John Wick 3 made $328 million, and that would be a fine number for this movie. I don't think anybody at Lionsgate would be upset about that. But there was maybe a hope this movie would make 400 million, if not more. But maybe we're seeing the limits of the John Wick franchise. It's only so popular, which is fine. Although the international numbers I do think are higher, so I could see this still making 350 million worldwide. I mean, if it's made this much of a bump in a week, then you would have to assume that it's going to make another. It should make at least another $100 million easily. So my thinking is that we're going to end up somewhere 185, 190 domestically if it continues where it's going. It doesn't drop too hard in the next few weeks, which I don't think it will. I think next weekend it'll probably make like 14, 15 million, if not around there. So you have to think, yeah, this is still going to make another hundred something $1 million before it wraps up. So this should be able to outgross John Wick 3. And it only cost $25 million more. So it's not like it was that big of a budget jump. So we're going to go to John Wick 3 real quick and look at its weekend drop compared to this. So with Parabellum, because some people are going to talk about this like, oh, 61% drop. But if we go look at the original domestic performance of John Wick 3, you have, here we go. And then we'll go to the weekend. Okay. So if you see here, it opened to 56 million and then had a 56% drop to 24 million, but that was over a holiday weekend and made 30 million. So it did hold better than this movie. So a lot of people, I think, expected this to do 55, 56% drop. But then if you look, 54%, which is a very steep drop, which could very well happen to the movie next weekend, where it only makes like 13 million. And then after that, if you look here, 33, 13, 36, 20, 34, 37, and it holds on for a long time. It goes from that one weekend of 11 with 125 and makes it to 171. So I project that sort of performance from John Wick 3. So I don't think this is that crazy that it's made the money it's made. Or that it dropped like it did. So someone's like, why didn't this hold as well as the other John Wick movies? It really didn't drop that much worse than the other John Wick movies. Even look at John Wick 2. John Wick 2 in its original release made 92 million and 79 internationally. And, I keep clicking the wrong thing. The domestic weekends, if you look here, the opening weekend was 30 million. It held 46%, which is actually pretty decent, honestly. And then 42, 48, 44, 55, and then eventually 61. So that film actually held fairly well. Now that I'm looking at it, because I have never really broke down the weekends on that. But still, worldwide, what that movie made is domestically what 3 made. So they're in a good position right now. I would say that John Wick 4 is still doing very well. It's still going to make a profit, and it's the 4th movie in a franchise. So if it does end up outgrossing 3, I mean, that still makes it an impressive franchise that every movie made more money and received, good reviews. Okay, so let's get to Dungeons and Dragons: Honor Among Thieves. I love Chris Pine. I've loved Chris Pine since Star Trek. His career has always been kind of disappointing. He's the best thing about the Wonder Woman movies. He's the best thing about a lot of movies he's in. But he just never quite gets the great roles that I think are worthy of him. It's cool that he's leading a franchise movie like this. It's very cool that they made a D&D movie that apparently doesn't suck, because I remember the Dungeons & Dragons movie from the early 2000s with Jeremy Irons that I used to watch on TV all the time, and needless to say, it's not a masterpiece of fantasy. So the budget of this is $151 million. And I'm going to assume that they spent at least $50 million on marketing. At least. So we're looking at a $200 million movie here. I just don't think 71 million worldwide is enough to cut it. It just isn't. It's not terrible, honestly. Like, considering a lot of things, this movie looked like it was just going to be a bomb and be terrible. So this isn't the worst performance in the world. Like, this movie probably would have opened worse without the positive reception. I think it could have had a lower opening weekend than it did. But even if the word of mouth for this is great, can this make much more than 100 million domestic and 200 million worldwide? I just don't see. You have to think, when they made this with the budget, they were hoping they had a movie that could make let's say 350 million. I would assume 400 million is what they would want the movie to make. With the budget that high. But let's say in their head they said, okay, on the low end we have a movie here that can make 350, 380 million. Now, in their positive hopes, they hoped they had a movie that would make $500 million. And sometimes these risks pay off. Look at the Jumanji reboot series. Did anyone expect those movies to make 800 or 950 million dollars like they did? I think that surprised a lot of people. So there was another universe where this movie opens at like 58 million and ends up being a huge hit. So or the first Pirates of the Caribbean was sort of that way. It happens sometimes. So you get why studios do this. I think they made a lot of mistakes here, though. One was the marketing, which is an obvious thing to blame. They didn't really show an appeal to why you should go see this. They didn't really sell the premise of why you would even make a Dungeons and Dragons movie outside of the IP alone. The release date, I think, is pretty bad. I think they dumped this in March. To release this in between John Wick and Mario Brothers, I think was an abysmal choice. I also don't think this is a March movie. I think this film would have played a lot better in the early fall, maybe August, September, maybe even the holidays. You could have played this around Christmas and got some of those weekends, the holiday weekend. This could have been like the second film that usually does well around the holidays when something like an Avatar is making most of the money. So that's one thing too. I think this was just not a good release date, and I think they miscalculated on that. And three, I do think there's something to be said. I think the title Dungeons and Dragons doesn't mean that much to that many people. To at least run out to the theater. That doesn't mean they're not interested, but are people going to run out on opening weekend to see a Dungeons and Dragons movie? I don't really think so. I don't think it's quite there as a franchise. Also, fantasy is really hard to sell. Like we think about Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings, but if you look at most other fantasy franchises or fantasy IPs that get made into movies, they usually don't make good money. I guess you can count Star Wars as well as a fantasy IP, but it's a tough genre to do, and it's an expensive genre because if you do it too low budget, it really looks like crap, and it really hurts. Especially nowadays, the standards are kind of off on these things. There was a better market for fantasy, like in the '80s, where you could make low budget fantasy movies and they could make a decent profit. Like this film, I don't know if I would produce this film for more than $100 million if I was making it. I don't think I would give somebody $150 million. I'd just be like, you have to figure this out with less. Sorry, because I wouldn't have faith in it. I just wouldn't have faith in this making enough money to justify the budget, and that's sort of what we're seeing here. I'm not knocking anybody. Kudos to Paramount. Kudos to the filmmakers. I think they're probably going to go on and get a bigger job due to this. But I just can't see sequels happening. If anything, I think this is going to be a cult classic. Where it doesn't do that well at the box office, and I could be wrong, but a lot of people like the movie and it has a cult following, and people watch it as the years go on. Think about Dread with Carl Urban. It fell into that category, didn't make any money, but people still watch it and talk about it. So yeah, I think the destiny of this film is probably a cult classic, and that's fine. It's not fine for the studio, but for the filmmakers, it's not the worst thing in the world to make a cult classic movie that people watch on Friday nights. So yeah, that's it. Um, I think the real story of the weekend though is just that it wasn't an exciting weekend at the box office. Everything kind of fell. Creed and Scream held okay, but John Wick falling really kind of made that less exciting, and then Dungeons and Dragons not quite having. It did go above its projections of around 30 million, but if it could have just made like 48 million, right? Let's just say 10 million more. We might have had a conversation here. We might have gone, "Hey, look, they actually pulled something off here to get that amount of people out." But if 38 million, I mean, this would have to have amazing word of mouth where like next weekend it makes 25 million, and then the weekend after that's like 20, and then 15 and 13 and 12 and 10, like when Inception came out and it just held great every weekend, or The Greatest Showman. It would have to have a performance like that to really change the trajectory that it's on now. But hey, what are you gonna do? What are you gonna do? I mean, it's somehow not as embarrassing as Ant-Man, which is pretty funny when you think about it. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe. Please hit the notification bell. And please put something in the comments because it's good for the algorithm. And give me your reasoning. Why do you think Dungeons & Dragons didn't open better? And did you see the movie and did you like it?